Hello, everyone, and welcome to the world-renowned review of AMC's The Terror, Episode 7, entitled Horrible from Supper. I am the world-renowned historian. First of all, these reviews all go up later than I intend them to. You know, I post them generally Thursday or Friday, and I see there's already 100 reviews, of course, that probably went up Monday night, which, I bully for you if you can actually do that. I'm just a little too busy IRL to make that happen, and I especially was this week. Like, especially right now, it is very late, and I should really probably just go to bed. But I am trying to get these reviews up, before the weekend hits, before the new episode comes out. I feel like that's a good, hard deadline to set, and I'm trying to take this really seriously. So it has been a busy, long week, again, IRL. But I'm going to sacrifice a little sleep to get this thing shot right now. I think that identity is the primary theme of this episode, and the title references this, as we will see later. Simply put, what makes us who we are. We may think we have a solid handle on our identities, our likes, our dislikes, our personality, our principles, and our worldview. But how much of that is dependent upon the trappings of your civilization? If I had grown up in rural Pakistan instead of rural California, I would have a very different view of the world and, how it was proper to live, what was the best way of life. If you take someone away from everything that they have used to construct their identity, all their loved ones, all the little day-to-day minutia, that all adds up to who we are, how long would it take before that identity starts to slip away? The men of Terror and Erebus have been in nominally British trappings for all this time, all these long years that they've been trapped in the ice. But that's about to end, because they are abandoning ship. The episode is constructed around a flashback sequence from when the men were first coming aboard the ship back in England. The first thing we hear is gulls squawking, and it's a far cry from the men's predicament in the present. A young man with a thick Irish accent asks Hodgson if he has advice for a first-timer. And Hodgson tells him, in a statement which will become ironic later, that when the ship sets sail, make sure you're aboard. And then Hodgson calls the guy Mr. Hickey. This guy. Fitzjames and Crozier are overseeing the outfitting of the sledge parties. Fitzjames laments that the men are packing a bunch of unpractical, unnecessary bullshit like glassware and, navigational tools. In his wisdom, Captain Crozier basically points out that these items are parts of the men's identity, and they serve a purpose for them other than simple sustenance. It's something a bit higher on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. These things help the men remember who they are. Hickey and his gang discuss leaving. Manson speculates that the advance party led by Lieutenant Fairholm may have Tuesday dinner waiting for them. And Gibson points out that they don't even know if they've made it. Gibson is basically like this harsh pessimist about the whole affair. Now, John Morphin, who we have been watching deteriorate for several episodes, collapses out on the ice. And Goodsir tells him that they will get him some other kind of remedy. A stronger tonic, the wine of coca, i.e. cocaine, something that will possibly help this guy. We cut back to Hickey's men, and one of them is talking about how the lemon juice doesn't seem to be warding off scurvy anymore. And the imagery here, I think, is pointedly evocative and deliberate. He points out that when scurvy gets bad, your gums draw back and old scars open up, which is true of scurvy, but the imagery is also very highly evocative of the theme of the episode, peeling back this outer layer of identity to reveal the reality and perhaps the ugliness underneath. Gibson, the pessimist, lets on to the others what he has been hiding. Basically, he brings up the idea of striking out on their own, once the larger party has dragged the supplies up onto the mainland. The conspirators decide to feel out the rest of the camp on Hickey's suggestion and see who else might be friendly to this kind of plan. Captain Crozier is in his quarters with a handful of men who have chosen to stay on Terror rather than strike out for Backsfish River with the rest of them. He tells them he's left them coal and food to get through the winter, and instructs them where to head if the ice actually breaks up. He also tells them that they're heroes, and one of them tells him that they're not. They would just prefer to die under English blankets, smelling English coal. It's part of their identity. I think Crozier knows they're dead men. and I think they know it too. Crozier tells Jobson to settle his personals and find his sledge party, and then he writes in the diary that Captain Crozier gives the order to abandon ship. Blanky and Crozier are leaving the ship, and Crozier has another of those great novel moments where he says the ship was his friend, his wife, his mother, his lover, but most importantly, his confessor. Terror knows everything about him. Blanky reminds him of when George Back wrecked her in 1837, and somehow she stayed afloat anyway. By the way, that actually happened. Blanky goes up above deck, and Crozier sees an open drawer, and he goes to close it. And we see two etched letters on the lid of the drawer. You know, it says EC. We don't know yet what that means. Crozier leaves Terror for the last time, you know, running his hand along the wood nostalgically. He walks outside, tosses his hat to Jobson, and he tells Irving to give the order. In the next scene, we see the brutal difficulty of sledging boats across an ice pack. You know, the men are chopping out the ice in front of it, sort of constantly getting a vehicle unstuck out of the mud, while Hartnell reads the ice ahead under Blanky's watchful eye. They like what they see, and, you know, Blanky agrees with Hartnell, so they sledge on. But watch Hickey in this scene. He's kind of walking in the back of the men, not bearing any weight on the strap across his body that they're using to, you know, pull the sledge across the ice. And Hickey does share a look with Hodgson. Later on, the men are camped, and Goodsir goes looking for John Morphin. He finds Collins and asks him where he is, and then he sees that Collins himself is under duress, and he asks after him. At first, Collins demurs, but, you know, Goodsir being Goodsir, he kind of gets through to him. They walk past a fire, and Collins kind of gives it a look. Collins essentially is shell-shocked. You know, this is full-on PTSD. You know, he talks about how he can smell the grease from inside the dive helmet from episode 1. And how he can't get the smells out of his head from Carnival that's, you know, Stanley set the fire at and caused to burn. Goodsir asks him if he means the smoke. That is not what he means. Collins explains that as he smelled his friend's bodies cooking, his mouth began to water. You know, he has a very poignant line about the different layers of our identities, being both animals and civilized humans. He says, "My stomach don't know horrible from supper, but I do." Collins collapses into Goodsir's arms as the good doctor ponders what he can do. What he could do. What he should do. Goodsir goes to ask Crozier to begin the hunting parties out on the ice pack, and Crozier tells him correctly that that's completely pointless. Essentially, the two men argue over their impossible situation. You know, the problem of the poison tins versus their absolute need to eat, while we hear the dinner bell ringing in the background. Then Crozier says, "We share a burden, you and I," referring to the secret of the poison food tins. And then Goodsir gives him a look that tells us that Crozier has no idea how much more of a burden that Goodsir carries without him, referring to Collins' confession of his physical reaction to the cooking of human meat. Hickey and his gang are outside eating while they talk about how much food that Neptune the dog is probably consuming. They say that the dog's rations are probably equal to theirs. Hickey watches as Lady Silence gets to the front of the chow line, and then Dr. Goodsir stealthily pulls her out of line. This gets Hickey curious. Why would Goodsir do that? Sergeant Tozier and John Morphin are going up on watch, and Morphin nearly collapses again. But they see something that upsets them. Tozier goes and fetches Crozier and Fitzjames, and they come out to find Fairholme's sledge party. The one who were supposed to have Tuesday's supper ready for Magnus Manson. Or what's left of that sledge party. Crozier tells Sergeant Tozier not to tell anybody, on pain of a full court-martial. But Fairholme's supposed rescue party for Terror and Erebus made it 18 miles. The men come to a massive ice ridge, really almost just a mountain made out of ice, blocking their path. Fitzjames and Crozier climb it first, and they find out that just on the other side is the camp they've been looking for. Fitzjames, in his characteristic optimism, points out that even the flag's up. The flag is up, but it's completely in tatters. Crozier is walking and talking with Lieutenant Little when Sergeant Tozier approaches them. Tozier points out that they've only got 8 Marines now, and he wants to suggest arming some more men to secure the camp perimeter. Now, oddly enough, the names he mentions are all guys on Hickey's crew that he's hanging out with all the time, including Hickey. He gets to Hickey's name, and Crozier tells him, "No, we're going to hold off on that." Crozier senses something foul afoot. You know, he blows Tozier off as gently as he can, but his smile disappears the moment Tozier walks away. Good Sir, when they're camped, is going through his personal effects. He has that photograph he took of Franklin and the other men, and he, interestingly enough, still has the corpse of Franklin's monkey in his trunk. And he takes the corpse out and he talks to it, telling it, "I am trying," meaning trying to save them from the lead poisoning that killed the monkey, so his death is not in vain. As if in response, moments later, we hear someone groaning in awful pain. Morphin has collapsed out on the rocks. Now, he asks Good Sir to shoot him, but Good Sir and Bridgens help him to his feet instead. This scene is so brutal. Morphin has his hands on a gun, and he tries to commit suicide by cop, essentially. We cut back and forth between the situation with Morphin and Collins inside and, trying to ignore it, and Crozier trying to talk Morphin down. And Good Sir tells Morphin that he has medications that they haven't tried yet. The wine of coca, the tonic. Fitzjames orders him to drop his weapon. And this sequence was a little confusingly shot to me, but it seemed like Morphin fired at the ground while one of the Marines shot him in the head. Once he's back in his tent, Good Sir breaks down, sobbing at having seen a patient, killed in front of him. And in a beautiful, poignant scene with no dialogue, Lady Silence comes into his tent and comforts him. Crozier asks Tom Hartnell if anyone else was involved when Hickey went out and seized Lady Silence. Now, Crozier is shaving in this scene, which is interesting for a few reasons. It's him holding up a part of his identity, that being the captain, holding high standards of grooming and such, and also the imagery of a blade next to human flesh. And this will carry this extra, connotation, particularly after Collins' admission. Hartnell tells him that there was indeed a fourth man, that Armitage was with them. Now, if you recall, Armitage was one of the men that Sergeant Tozier earlier suggested be armed. Jobson comes in, and he and Crozier kind of have this, funny subordinate boss type of relationship. They talk about how Crozier is usurping his assistant's duties by shaving his own face. He also reports that the dog Neptune has gone missing. Crozier says he will come back when he's hungry, which, given how things go later, is slightly ominous. Crozier holds a command meeting with Fitzjames and the lieutenants as some of the others go and bury John Morphin. And Crozier finally informs them that all of their food is either spoiled or lead poisoned. They plan the hunting parties, and Crozier tells Collins that he's going to be remaining in camp. Collins points out that this means they won't have enough officers on the hunting parties, and in kind of a sweet moment, Crozier promotes his assistant Jobson to lieutenant. Jobson has his mind blown by this, and it's like a rare moment of happiness for Crozier and the men out there in this situation. In keeping with the theme of the episode, Jobson has earned a place at the table with the officers. He has had his identity upgraded in their eyes. Hickey and Hodgson have a conversation in Hickey's tent with Sergeant Tozier present. Now, Hickey lays out his case about how the tins are killing them. Nobody's told him anything about it, but basically he's a keen observer of things, and he's put it all together. He doesn't know that it's lead poisoning, but he knows that it's something. Both he and Tozier point out that it's odd that nobody has told Hodgson, as he is an officer. Hickey points out the issue with the numbers game, and in an amoral, pragmatic sort of sense, you kind of got to admit the guy's got a point. Crozier is trying to drag 100 men across the finish line here. Hickey points out correctly that if they catch 3 seals, that's about a bite per man. If you ignore morality, moving forward with a smaller party makes a certain kind of pragmatic sense. Hickey shows Hodgson something in a bag. It turns out to be the corpse of poor Neptune. Dog lovers cry. Hickey claims he broke his leg on the rocks, and he simply put him down. Now, do we believe that? I don't know. Hickey asks Hodgson to be their captain, with Hickey himself as the lieutenant, when the shit hits the fan and the conspirators must separate from Crozier's party. Now, Hodgson says he is not made of that, and that's a quote, and Hickey's response here is very interesting. He says, "You can be whatever you need to be out here." Hickey is wielding a knife in this scene, which may or may not be some foreshadowing. I don't know. He points out correctly that survival is a nasty piece of business. Think about it. Like, apply morality to the harsh crucible of natural selection for most of the time that life has existed on Earth. And it's really pretty goddamn horrifying. You know, between Hickey and Crozier's view of the world, Hickey is the one with time on his side. This is a really powerful scene, and we cut away before Hickey can finish the sentence. What I'm about to tell you next is going to stamp out whatever hope you've been given. Hodgson, Irving, Hickey, and Farr are on a hunting party south. The men are fantasizing about the caribou they're going to eat when Hodgson brings up that the word diet comes from the Greek word diata for way of life. As the camera lingers on Cornelius Hickey, remember that for later. Irving splits their party to cover some more ground. Farr, Irving, and Hickey go south, and Hickey spots a group of Inuit down in the valley below them. Irving goes down to speak with them alone, leaving Hickey and Farr on the ridge far behind him. The Inuit family is 5 adults and a child, probably 3 generations, maybe a couple of brothers. Irving manages to communicate with one called Koviuk. Irving looks very silly standing there in an environment the Inuit are so well adapted to. They give him some food, and Irving's mouth is disgusted by it, while his stomach hungers for more. And if I remember, that's exactly the lines that were in the novel, and the actor's face just conveys that beautifully. They trade a bit, telescope or eyeglass or spyglass or whatever you want to call it, for food, and Irving looks behind him to find that Hickey and Farr are gone. Irving asks the Inuit to stay there, and he runs back up to them. The visuals here are stark and truly, in my opinion, remarkable. Reminiscent of something out of Ingmar Bergman or Stanley Kubrick. For a moment, the film almost looks black and white. You've got this total white backdrop of the Arctic with just a little, either somebody wearing black or just it looks black against the backdrop. Just wonderful. Irving finds Hickey crouched over Farr, and he runs up to them, thinking that perhaps Farr has collapsed from any number of things. Lead poisoning, scurvy, malnutrition, could be anything. And he reaches them, and Hickey shanks him. I don't really have another word for it. Hickey stabs him a dozen times in the chest with that little knife he's been brandishing all episode. And the only thing I can really compare it to is in the last season of Breaking Bad, when the prison execution scene, that was the kind of shanking execution they did. This reminded me very much of that. The sound, the performances, and Hickey just putting his hand over Irving's mouth as he watches the life go out of him. Just truly a disturbing scene. Really even more so than it was in the novel. As for why he killed Irving, it was more obviously connected to the fact that Irving caught him in a homosexual act in the novel. The TV show didn't connect that quite so much. I will be interested to see what direction they go with this interpretation of Hickey's character. I know this review's getting long, but since he just got whacked, let's say a few words about the real John Irving. The real John Irving was born in 1815 in Edinburgh, and he was a 30-year-old lieutenant when he volunteered for Franklin's Arctic expedition. He was a bright, extremely religious young man, still carrying with him a medal that he'd won as a teenager for excelling in mathematics. Irving was very optimistic about the chances of the voyage's success, stating so in a letter to his brother's wife in 1845. Irving wrote, "I am very sanguine of succeeding in the object of our expedition." Sanguine means optimistic, by the way. Everything has been done that the latest improvements in the various branches of arts relating to nautical matters could suggest, and every reservation against the climate provided for the health and comfort of the crews. And we must, for the rest, put ourselves and, what is dearer, our hopes, into the hands of our Maker. Irving's grave was found by the U.S. Army officer Frederick Schwatka in the late 1870s. Some serious care and labor had gone into the grave, as the men, even in their weakened state, seemed to have taken the effort to build Irving an entire sepulchre of stone. This is something that was very rarely done at this time, but Schwatka had Irving's remains repatriated to Edinburgh, where they were interred in an elaborate ceremony presided over by his brother Louis, who was by then a major general. John Irving's remains, at least, went home. Immediately after the intensely disturbing murder of Irving, we cut back to the flashback around which this entire episode was constructed. We see John Morphin, a healthy, vibrant-looking John Morphin, come aboard, and of course that has some serious poignance, considering this episode. And then a man comes aboard. He cheerfully presents his paperwork to Hodgson, and Hodgson comments that he recognizes his own signature, but he does not recognize the man standing before him. It's the man we know as Cornelius Hickey. Dun, dun, dun! Hickey goes to Irving, who tells him to find the master caulker on the Orlop. Hickey doesn't know where the Orlop is. Irving asks him, well, you've got a change of pace then, and Hickey says, a change of everything, sir. Identity, the theme of this episode. And then we cut back to the man we know as Cornelius Hickey, right after he killed John Irving, shirtless, almost naked, dancing around out there in the Arctic. So I realize this review is too long already, but let's go ahead and talk about the twist. In the novel, Hickey was Hickey as far as we're concerned, This whole talented Mr. Ripley twist didn't exist. When I first saw this twist, I really hated it. Not because it departed from the book, I never care about that. But I was just like, why? What's the point? What does this add to the already considerable power of this narrative? It felt like just a big surprise for the sake of having a big surprise. But I got to thinking. So the Hickey of the novel, as far as we know, is basically just a caulker's mate. The Hickey of the show, I think this revelation would suggest, is a career con-man criminal who got into some trouble back in England, maybe ran into this real Hickey in a bar, maybe they got to talking over some pints, and the man we know as Hickey saw a way to expunge his record. Kill or somehow remove this young Hickey idiot and take over his identity. And I ask you all, who is more likely to be the careful, observant, psychological manipulator? Some caulker's mate or a career con man? At the end of the day, it does make the character make more sense. And at the end of the day, isn't that kind of the perfect revelation? Like, when you first see it, you're like, wait, what the hell? But then you look back on all the clues and all the parts where you're like, I should have known. And you're like, wow, yeah, they totally earned that. In many ways, as we're seeing, a career con man who traded in his identity to become a lowly caulker's mate may have the best chance of survival out of anyone out there. Alright, everybody, that's it for this week. Sorry if it went long. Sorry it was late in the week. If you reacted to my take on this episode in any way, do all that good YouTube stuff. Like, dislike, comment. I love talking to you guys in the comments. Subscribe if you want. Unsubscribe if you want. It's your YouTube account. Whatever you want to do. But either way, I'll be talking on this channel soon. So hopefully I'll be seeing you soon. And be good, kiddos. World-renowned historian.